Considering that Japan's economy has been stuck in a rut since the early 1990s, the country's current position as the world's third biggest is all the more remarkable. Tokyo is the largest and most economically powerful metropolis in the world, yet the fate of the rest of Japan lies elsewhere. This divergence is the most glaring manifestation of genuine economic crisis that many developed nations are secretly battling. Over 37 million people call Tokyo home, and the city's GDP is over $2 trillion US. If this metropolitan area was a sovereign nation, it would be the 8th biggest in the world, larger than Italy and smaller than Canada. Since Tokyo has grown so large that it no longer fits within the boundaries of its original prefecture, it has gradually merged with other major cities in the surrounding Kanto region, including Chiba, Gunma, Kanagawa, and Yokohama, to form what is now commonly known as the Tokyo Metropolitan Area or the Kanto Metropolitan Area. Welcome back to the Financial Fortune YouTube channel, your trusted source for thought-provoking discussions on the pressing issues that shape our global economy. In today's video, we confront a topic that demands our attention: the inequality crisis. Despite its undeniable impact on societies and economies worldwide, it seems that many shy away from discussing this growing divide. Prepare to dive into the complexities of income and wealth inequality as we shed light on its far-reaching implications and explore potential solutions. Join us in this crucial conversation as we uncover the underlying factors contributing to this crisis and the urgent need for greater awareness and action. For mathematical purposes, it makes no difference how it's defined. The Japanese economy is splitting in two, with one metropolitan area racing ahead of the rest of the country and smaller regional hubs. Even though Japan and Tokyo are particularly egregious cases, this is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's likely to worsen over the next decade. In Japan, regional inequality relative to a few major urban regions risks becoming a major drag on the country's otherwise robust economy. People may feel they have no choice but to move to costly urban areas, where they will likely have to share overcrowded, substandard housing, all in an effort to be a part of the thriving sector of the economy. There are many who prefer city life, yet even they are feeling the effects of regional disparity. So why is urban-rural divide such a drag on the economy as a whole? For what reason is this taking place? It's not as simple as it seems at first glance. Finally, what solutions exist for addressing these issues? The existence of income disparities between areas is not a threat to the economy as a whole. It costs more to live there, since that's where they make the things that make people there so productive. It balances out if individuals are paid more, yet have to spend more to maintain their standard of living. To compensate for this disparity, economists typically use a concept known as purchasing power parity to revise production numbers. Assume, for the sake of this exceedingly simplified example, that two economies both generate 1 million tons of weight annually and have the same population. Each worker in the first economy takes home $10,000 each year, as the first economy's weight sells for $400 per ton. It's more costly to live in the second economy. It charges $600 per ton and compensates its employees $15,000 annually to make up for the higher pricing that consumers of this hypothetical economy will face when purchasing the only output of this economy. The nominal gross domestic product, or GDP, of Economy 1 is $400 million, whereas the GDP of Economy 2 is $600 million. Which economy is large, wealthier, or more prosperous? They're both making the same amount of the same product, and they can both buy the same quantity of that product with their annual salary. Therefore, after adjusting for PPP, the GDP of these two economies would be the same. Real-world application of this adjustment is significantly more challenging due to the fact that economies produce more than one basic item and utilize multiple currencies. The Consumer Price Index in the United States is used as a benchmark to calculate real purchasing power parity. The GDP of a country will be increased by the purchasing power parity adjustment if the cost of living there is lower than in the United States. The World Bank estimates China's nominal GDP to reach $17.7 trillion in 2021. But due to the lower prices of most products and services in China compared to the United States, the Chinese people are able to purchase far more with their money. The entire value of their output in the same year was $27.3 trillion at PPP rates. The buying power of a country's gross domestic product will be reduced if its consumer prices are higher than those in the United States. Since the United States is such a prosperous and productive economy, GDP is usually not reduced to account for PPP. Adjusting economic data so that it reflects a country's actual output rather than just its consumer prices is becoming increasingly important everywhere except Switzerland and Luxembourg, because at its core, economics is about meeting the needs of consumers. Yet things aren't always so cut and dry. Nominal or unadjusted GDP estimates are the norm for economists to deal with, especially those who study global macroeconomics. It's not because they're too lazy to account for PPP differences. Rather, raw numbers are more relevant when economies interact. Our previous wheat-based economies would begin to struggle. No one would want to purchase wheat for $600 a ton if they could obtain it from another economy selling it for $400 a ton. But if these two regions wanted to trade with one another, it would require people to travel a longer distance, which also incurs costs. If someone were earning $15,000 per year in one economy and $20,000 per year in another, they might afford a far nicer home in the latter for the same price in the former. There are obstacles to free trade and travel between these two countries because they are both independent nations, such as tariffs and taxes on imports and exports and immigration controls. If, however, these economies were only subnational divisions of the same nation, then virtually all of these obstacles would vanish. Jobs in major metropolitan locations, like Tokyo, tend to pay better than those in rural areas or smaller towns. Because disparities between big urban centers and the rest of the country affect not only farms and the outback, but also smaller urban centers that may nevertheless be home to 1 million people. People in these megacities may now make more money, but they must also contend with higher living costs. It merely expands access to the rest of the country's non-regionally specialized goods and services. You won't pay more for a car because you're buying it in the city, and other costs are less inflated than wages. It becomes extremely difficult to relocate to Tokyo or any other big cities throughout the world unless you currently reside there, which is an issue for the wider economy. The difficulty of relocating back to the city after leaving further exacerbates the affordability crisis. For example, let's say I live in Sydney, which is quite pricey. If I were to relocate a few hours away to a smaller seaside town, I could certainly afford a much nicer property. There's no reason for me to stay in Sydney when I can perform my work from anywhere with an internet connection. One major factor in my economically unreasonable choice is the possibility that I won't be able to afford a return to Sydney if housing prices there continue to rise at a greater rate than elsewhere. I mean, I'd be all right, but I'm taking up a place that might be used by someone whose profession requires them to be in a big metropolis. Cities fit for a genius's mind. The principal engines of invention are the world's universities and corporations. When individuals are in close proximity to one another, they are better able to exchange skills and ideas. The whole national or perhaps global economy may be at risk if individuals are unable to relocate to these places, or are unwilling to make the required lifestyle adjustments to do so. The rate of improvement in connectivity between urban and rural regions will increase. The aging of their populations is a further challenge for the world's most developed economies. While urban areas are fantastic for fostering the technological innovation that will fuel the world economy's long-term growth, they are typically not the best places to raise a family. Globally, urban communities have far lower birth rates than their rural counterparts. When starting a family, many people choose to relocate outside of large cities due to the prohibitive cost of purchasing a home suitable for a growing family. People still do it, but it usually involves cramped living quarters that are bad for everyone involved. One solution is for people to settle just outside the city, in the suburban regions. Then they can commute back to take advantage of the highly valuable industries that major cities are home to. However, this leads to urban sprawl, in which low-density housing spreads out in an ever-widening ring around the city center, necessitating ever-increasing transport infrastructure and longer commute times. It would be unfortunate if, in the long run, family residences located within an acceptable distance of the city cost the same as similarly sized homes in the city proper. This forces an increasing proportion of people to decide between leaving a city and the possibilities it affords to establish a family, making significant quality of life sacrifices to raise a family, or deciding not to start a family at all of which are unattractive options. This year alone, we've had to emphasize the significance of young people joining the workforce to replace the rising number of older workers who are now retiring in our documentaries about South Korea, France, Macau, Hong Kong, and the EU. In industrialized economies where most people live in cities, having children is difficult and expensive. This is a contributing factor to the decline in birth rates seen in such countries. The human cost of this problem is substantial, far beyond its monetary and theoretical effects on long-term growth. Most individuals would want to establish a family if it were financially feasible to do so. But in many major urban areas, this is simply not the case. And because of the disparity in wealth between urban and rural areas, many individuals can't afford to leave the city. Can the problem of disparity between large cities and everywhere else be solved if aging regulations pose such a threat to the economy and sluggish innovation might cost the global economy trillions? There will always be better paying professions and more attractive locations than others. There is no need to connect these two factors at this time, but no sane strategy will be able to alter this reality without causing more harm to the economy than good. There is less of a requirement than ever before for a large number of employees to be in the same city, much less the same nation, as their place of employment. Housing demand in industrial hubs can be mitigated by the implementation of rules that promote telecommuting by both employees and employers. If fewer people need to enter and leave a city center each day, less transportation infrastructure will be needed to accommodate them. The increased short-term demand for homes in regional locations is one possible detrimental side effect of this. The influx of employees from higher income cities will push up costs everywhere they settle, causing societal problems. In the end, this can cause the same housing shortages and high costs that prompted economists to advocate for people to leave dense urban areas in the first place. The cost of real estate eventually makes its way into the cost of many other commodities. On a macroeconomic scale, if a restaurant's rent doubles, the cost will be passed on to consumers. This could turn out to be beneficial in the long run. People who desire to relocate back into or out of megacities would benefit from a decrease in the cost of living there and an increase in the cost of living elsewhere if the price differential between these two economic zones were less. Building up high-quality, high-density housing surrounding these megacities is another thing authorities may do to mitigate the effects of this economic trend. Increasing the housing supply will lower prices and well-managed suburban and exurban regions may become more family-friendly, reducing the birthright problem that plagues modern economies concentrated in the city. Sadly, these aren't groundbreaking solutions. Most economists working on these issues recognize that policies that promote remote employment and cheap housing projects would reduce regional inequality, but they acknowledge that doing so will be difficult. Residents of desirable regions adjacent to cities will almost always push back against rezoning and high-density construction, even if they support the concept of cheap housing in principle. The same municipal administrations that are happy to welcome well-off city dwellers will also have a lot to explain to their constituents. These are tough measures to implement when people feel they're being priced out of their homes, and no one wants to take them, but they will have to be taken eventually, or the world's major cities, which have been the engines of economic growth, will become a drag on the global economy. Just for kicks, let's try another. Let's take a look at where Tokyo falls on the Economics Explained scale, given that it is the largest city in the world and its local economy exceeds all but the greatest nations on the globe. Rank order is customary when discussing matters of scale. Estimates of Tokyo's actual production are highly variable. This is because it is far more difficult to assess imports and exports in a city where there are no formal restrictions over what is taken in and out than it is when goods enter a nation. It also depends on how you define Tokyo City's ever-shifting boundaries. If it were to become a sovereign state, it would have an economy that ranks amongst the greatest in the world. Estimates vary, but the best ones put it between 1.5 and 2.2 trillion US dollars. 2.2% of global exports come from only one place. I would rate Tokyo an 8. Since megacities like Tokyo are home to highly productive industries, the GDP per capita is likewise rather high. Even after accounting for the less productive periphery of the city, Tokyo remains below the national average of the USA, with an annual output per person of over $60,000, which is 50% greater than the national average. That, however, sets an exceptionally high standard. Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo are the three cities most often mentioned alongside one another when discussing the economic hubs of Asia. While the speculative frenzy of the 80s and 90s may be long gone, Tokyo's economy is more solid than ever thanks to the new measured approach. I give it an 8 out of 10 for the whole. Growth is difficult to quantify since few groups keep tabs on urban production, and even fewer do so over time, taking into account shifting population and territorial boundaries. From the data provided by the OECD and Visual Capitalists, the most conservative estimate we could come up with was a growth rate of roughly 3%, which is exactly ordinary for an advanced economy of this size, and especially outstanding in the light of stagnant Japanese economy. Overall, I'd give Tokyo a 5. When it comes to manufacturing, Tokyo has a solid reputation for creating high-quality goods and services in an open and honest manner, and it is home to some of the most prestigious corporations in the world. Tokyo as a nation would do very well in this regard. As a result, Tokyo averages 7.4 on a scale from 0 to 10, placing it second only to its home country. As we conclude this crucial video, we are left with profound questions that require collective reflection and action. How can we address the root causes of the inequality crisis and create more inclusive economic systems? What role can governments, businesses, and individuals play in bridging the wealth gap and promoting greater equality? How can we ensure that economic growth benefits all members of society, regardless of their background? Remember, discussing the inequality crisis openly and honestly is the first step toward meaningful change. Stay tuned to the Financial Fortune channel for more insightful discussions on vital economic and social issues. Together, let's foster awareness and work toward building a more equitable and prosperous future for all. Until next time, may our conversations lead to actionable solutions in a more inclusive world.